the top 10 wide receiver and tight end unit rankings, plus news and notes from across college football after the stinger. Hello and welcome to episode 49 of Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. Thank you for joining us today. If you are here live, we of course very much appreciate it, but please do give this video a like and subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Also, if you are so inclined, please give a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts for your favorite podcast in the Campus to Canton podcast feed. There's an ongoing competition there. It's getting a little bit heated behind the scenes, but some of your favorite shows would love to hear from you, and also are offering some incentives for folks who are going in and reviewing. But getting those reviews in and the comments in Apple Podcasts really have been great for us. One, we want to know how we're doing. How can we best serve our audience? But also, of course, as I'm sure every other podcast you've ever listened to has said, those reviews really do help us to grow, help us to get in front of new listeners. And as we are looking forward to the 2024 college football season, we definitely want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to provide our great content to as many folks that might be interested in it. On that note, the CFB Winning Edge podcast started our preview series last week with our MAC football preview. We have Conference USA this week. We are currently scheduled to record on Thursday night, so look for that in your podcast feed on Friday. But then, of course, at Campus to Canton, we're much more than just podcasts. If you are a member for as little as $2.99 per month at CampusToCanton.com, you can get access to a wide range of content, including written CFF content on the site. A couple of great examples from this week. From Volume Pigs, wrote up the wide receiver you didn't know you needed in CFF, talking about a former Auburn wideout who seems like is well positioned to make a major impact in Conference USA this season. Had a huge spring for Middle Tennessee, so get to learn more about Amari Kelly there. Also, Chris K has been very active writing up a bunch of great content for CFF players. His most recent piece broke down a series of 4 different trades over the last month in a league, a longstanding dynasty league of his. So give that a view as well. If you're like me, and trading is one of the more difficult things for me. I don't feel like I always have a great grasp of it, how to approach it. Getting some insight from somebody like Chris K, who has a long track record of success in CFF, and again has been very active writing for the site at CampusToCanton.com. So get access to those articles, as well as tons of tools, rankings. I know Jared Pongren has his dynasty rankings up at CampusToCanton.com, but tons of great written work, tools, and rankings, all kinds of great stuff. But also, if you want access to everything that we have to offer, please consider becoming an All-22 or C2C Winning Edge tier member. That's where you get access to our CFB Winning Edge returning production database, our team profiles, a lot of the stuff that we talk about here on this show. You get it all at your fingertips as an All-22 or C2C Winning Edge member. All right, one final note. We are recording Wednesday, May 29th. We're 87 days until week 0 of the 2024 college football season, and CFF is really, really ramping up. I'm finally going to be part of another draft. Haven't done anything since Jared's way too early in January, CFF draft. So John Lobb has put on a mock draft for Fantrax for the last 11 years, which he calls the Summa Cum Laude mock draft. There's also going to be a follow-up Q&A with each of the 12 drafters, myself among the group. CFF experts that you listen to on Campus Canton podcast, plenty of other places as well. We're going to offer insight to their picks and how the draft went down as well. So I'm going to knock a little rust off this evening, but most importantly, do check out the write-up that John puts together, puts a lot of time and effort into trying to provide great content to the CFF community as well. All right. Let's get going with a little bit of transfer talk. All right, as we usually have done the last few weeks here. It's starting to wind down, and we still do see the occasional player who we expect to make an impact in 2024. But for the most part, a lot of the news that's sort of coming across my desk as far as transfer updates to our returning production database, to our team profiles. It's a lot of depth moves, but one item in particular, maybe the most impactful player left on the uncommitted side of the ledger, entering this week at Ole Miss. Unsurprisingly, Ole Miss, which in the most recent 247 Sports top 10 transfer portal team rankings, Ole Miss is number one. Brad Crawford of 247 Sports had a nice write-up earlier this week with those top 10 teams. And Lane Kiffin only adding to the Rebels, just incredible transfer haul. Part of the reason why our projections in particular are very, very high on Ole Miss this year. But the name to know is Chris Hardie. If you were unfamiliar, Hardie was a really productive defensive lineman at Jacksonville State last season in 12 games. And, he's a 290-pound defensive lineman. So did play on the edge some, but these numbers are just pretty eye-popping for anybody on the defensive line. Had 59 tackles, 36 pressures, 14 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, had an interception, had a pass deflection as well. And Hardie is going to be slotted into that Ole Miss 2 deep and expected to contribute, I would say, right away. That unit, we'll talk about defensive line and defenses as a whole in our shows next week. But unsurprisingly, Ole Miss top 5 in those D-line position and unit ratings. Slotted in Hardie, who is a 99 rated player according to our individual player ratings. And if this is your first time with us, those are similar to what you might expect in the EA Sports College Football 25 game coming out soon, but a little bit different in that we have no longer stopped at that 99 or we've traditionally used a 100 as our max rating. In the last couple of years, we decided that we were going to let it go past that 100, and Hardie is one of those players who is very close to breaking that threshold. Just a ton of production so far in his career. He is actually listed as 6'2", 260. So I misspoke earlier. I said 290. So a little bit more of a, not going to see him play inside as much, especially in the SEC, but somebody who can really fill up the stat sheet. Did it at Jacksonville State, had his best year as Jack State transitioned, of course, to the FBS level, taking another big step forward, hopping into the SEC. Will he be as dominant? Perhaps not. Probably won't be relied on quite as much. He played over 70% of his snaps last season, over 70% of the defensive snaps for Jacksonville State. Hardie was on the field, which is quite a high percentage for a defensive lineman, certainly. So might not have the overall numbers that he put up last year, but I think still going to be somebody who's going to make plays for an Ole Miss team that we're going to talk about at length a little later on today, because a lot of the work that Kiffin and his coaching staff have done, the transfer portal have really paid off as far as rankings in the wide receiver and tight end units. We are getting a couple of comments in today, which we very much appreciate it. Tournament bracket in the YouTube comments. Thoughts on Jolly at NC State or Stays at Tennessee? We'll get to those tight ends a little bit later on. Also say, curious to hear your thoughts on Mike Matthews at Tennessee and his upside, or the receiving core in Raleigh. So stay tuned a little later as we dig into those wide receiver and tight end unit rankings. But a couple of other notes as well. Jacksonville State got another running back, and haven't talked a lot of, or we're not talking about every addition here, depth piece, but this name jumped out to me a little bit as I was going through and updating our Jacksonville State team profiles, because we talked about the Gamecocks a little bit. There's been a sort of an evolution very quickly in that running back room over the last couple of weeks, where it was incredibly thin for a little while, and then they added 4 transfers in 2 weeks or so. The most recent being Trey Stewart, Division II transfer. He ran for nearly 3,000 yards and 24 touchdowns in 3 seasons, added over 600 receiving yards as well, 5 touchdown receptions in the mix. That the vast majority of that over the last 2 years that Trayshawn Stewart was at Limestone at the Division II level. So had 1,500 yards on the ground a couple of years ago, 1,300 yards last season, double-digit touchdowns on the ground in 2022, over 200 yards receiving in both years, multiple touchdown catches. So how will Stewart sort of stack up in that running back room? We do still have Anwar Lewis and Ron Wiggins projected as our starter, or kind of code number 1 there. Lewis perhaps with a slight edge, but Rich Rodriguez, head coach at Jack State, has added Michael Dukes, most recently of USF, previously of Clemson, Andrew Paul at Georgia, and now Trey Stewart. So what was a real weakness, 10, 14 days ago, has really started to round into a top 5 unit in Conference USA, which may or may not be, saying a ton, but we know that Jacksonville State offense has and specifically Rich Rodriguez, has a track record for producing at that position. Generally rotates a lot of players in, so it's not necessarily like we're going to expect to see a super heavy workload for fantasy purposes. But if you're looking for a team like Jacksonville State, who a lot of folks expect to contend in Conference USA this year, and they are top 3 in our CUSA power rankings, they're going to need ball carriers, and that was a position that really needed to be addressed and has been in the last couple of weeks. So one team that we'll talk about a little bit later on, Texas State, has been very active. I believe that the count is now up to 7 transfers in the last week. Maybe the most well-known name, former Florida Gators linebacker Manny Nunnery has signed with Texas State, which also added multiple offensive linemen, a tight end, defensive lineman, very active, 48, 72 hours for Texas State. A lot of signees rolling in. We did mention those transfer portal team rankings, where Ole Miss is number 1 in the 247 Sports most up-to-date transfer rankings. Did want to give a brief rundown. Oregon, number 2, which Oregon, another team that we'll talk about a little bit later today in those position and unit rankings, followed by Alabama. We discussed prior to that spring window coming open that Alabama certainly was going to be very active in the transfer portal. That has certainly come to fruition and really paying off with filling some of the holes that were left by transfer departures after Nick Saban retired. Number 4, Texas A&M, a little bit more I'm not going to say quantity over quality, because I do think there are some real quality players in that Texas A&M recruiting class, but I believe 28 incoming transfers according to 247 Sports. So the Aggies have been very, very active under new head coach Mike Elko in the transfer portal. Number 5, Florida, which has had a really nice late spring as the Gators prepare to play the toughest schedule in college football, which we discussed a few shows ago. Number 6, Texas, really has addressed maybe the wide receiver room more than any other. Texas is a team that ranks in the top 10 in our wide receiver position strength rankings. Number 7, Florida State. That Florida State team, of course, had such a great regular season, ended on a real sour note, despite winning the ACC championship game with Jordan Travis sidelined a couple of weeks prior to that. So a lot of the players that were a key part of that success early on graduated, moved on, and a lot of opportunity for incoming transfers. The most notable name, DJ Uyunglele, of course, but a lot of additions across, basically across the board. Florida State was active as they have been. Mike Norvell has really maybe been the most consistently successful portal recruiter thus far, hit on a lot of players that played key roles in that 13-win run through the ACC championship game. But Roydell Williams, Malik Benson coming in from Alabama, part of that departing group that we discussed earlier. Maybe half a dozen players going to play significant snaps, contribute on the defensive side of the ball. A couple of starters potentially as well. So very, very good class for Florida State. Colorado is in the top 10, and again, don't necessarily mean this in a disparaging way, but the quantity, I think, is the biggest piece for the Buffs. 42 commits. And of course, Colorado has had a ton of turnover each of the last 2 seasons, but there's some talented players in there as well. LeJontay Wester, a transfer coming in, is part of what is a top 10 wide receiver group for Colorado in our rankings. Ohio State, quite the opposite. Very, very much quality over quantity. Only 7 transfer commits for the Buckeyes, but they've handpicked some of the best players in college football, add to one of the most talented rosters. So really, really strong group for Ohio State. And then Miami, who made perhaps the most impactful, you could argue, I suppose, but what we're hearing about Cam Ward at the quarterback position, and hopefully solidifying that for Miami as the Hurricanes look to really, build up, make a run in the ACC. Damian Martinez at running back in the spring, another headliner there, of course, but Miami, yet another wide receiver group that ranks quite high in our rankings, which we will get to. But one final note here before we dig into those wide receiver and tight end rankings. MAC win totals were posted by DraftKings when we did that CFB Winning Edge MAC preview, when we talked about it a little bit here on Friday. We didn't have those win totals yet. So I am going to update in our Campus to Canton Discord in the C2C Winning Edge tier chat. I'm going to throw the win totals and that updated spreadsheet, which we put together for every preview to show where our projections are, plus or minus, compared to those DraftKings win totals. And these are our official, quote unquote, official projections for the season, which if you are just joining us, over the last 3 years, we've done our CFB Winning Edge win total projections in our team profiles, compared those to DraftKings. We have a 60.4% winning percentage over that time across all FBS teams. We were 55.6% last year. When we see plus or minus 1 full win, those numbers get even a little bit better. And so there were 3 teams where we had met that plus or minus 1 win total. That was Akron, Eastern Michigan, and Miami of Ohio. A couple of overs and an under there, where our projection differs from what is posted at DraftKings by a full win or more. We also put in the odds on a fictional $100 bet to see, okay, if we risk $100, what do we win? Tally all that up at the end of the season as well. But those will be updated in the Discord after the show. All right. Looking here at wide receiver rankings. These are, again, the CFB Winning Edge position strength rankings. What we do, if this is your first time with us, in our CFB Winning Edge team profiles, we have individual player ratings for every player in college football. We group them together in position by position, build those up into roster strength ratings, which help us build our overall team strength ratings, which help us project those win totals we were just talking about. But for position strength, we're talking about raw talent coming out of high school. We adjust for experience and career production. So our position strength ratings differ a little bit from what are the most talented, quote unquote, talented units, which we'll talk about as well. But this is, they're weighted for our starters. Projected starters carry the heaviest weight in these position strength ratings, but there is a depth component to it as well. And number one is Ole Miss, where, in years past, it's been sort of a real slam dunk. Oh, it's Ohio State and everybody else at the wide receiver position. And Ohio State, of course, very, very talented group of wide receivers still, but it was a little more, wide open. I had no idea who was going to come out number one, and I was a little bit surprised that it was Ole Miss. But what the Rebels have done, of course, through the transfer portal, have found players who maybe weren't considered the most talented coming out of high school. A player like Trey Harris, who transferred to Oxford from Louisiana Tech, did not miss a beat, continued to be very, very productive, has added to his individual player rating through that production. He is now right at a 100 rated player, so one of the very best wide receivers in college football. And he certainly played like it. He was targeted 87 times, had 54 catches, 985 yards, 8 touchdowns. So big play, capitalized on the opportunities that he had. 18.2 yards per reception. And Ole Miss added to, brought in maybe another number one, sort of a co-number one wideout, especially if he's going to be healthy. But Antoine Wells Jr., Juice Wells, transferring in from South Carolina, severely limited last season, had just 3 catches, 37 yards, and a touchdown, appeared in only 2 games for South Carolina. But prior to that, had quickly established himself after transferring from James Madison, quickly as one of the best wide receivers in the SEC. So if he's able to recapture that 2022 and prior level of play, Ole Miss is going to have one of the top duos in college football. Juice Wells is a 99 rated player in our numbers. Also, Jordan Watkins, maybe a little bit under the radar. He only had 1 fewer catch than Trey Harris. 53 catches, 741 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Just a consistent performer, not quite at the high end level, not necessarily expecting that he's going to go out and break through with 1,000 yards in 2024. But that trio, Trey Harris, Juice Wells, and Jordan Watkins, who is a 90 rated player in our individual player ratings, altogether form one of the top rated wide receiver groups in the country. And Ole Miss is definitely deep at that position as well. They have added one of the top junior college players in recent memory in Deion Smith, have him projected as a player in the 2 deep, could emerge as a starter, especially if somebody's a little bit banged up, if Wells isn't back up to 100%. We do expect him to be, but should something happen there. Smith definitely positioned to be an impact player. Aiden Williams, who saw significant numbers of snaps as a true freshman last year as well. Caden Lee rounding out that 2 deep group, but there are some more relatively inexperienced players who will have an opportunity as well. Marquise Willis, a JUCO transfer, pretty highly rated coming out of high school, or pretty highly rated, I should say, coming out of junior college, a 91 rated player in the On3 rankings, low 80s in our individual player ratings, CFB Winning Edge, and then Janoris Hobson as well. So, certainly Lane Kiffin and that coaching staff were aggressive in the transfer portal the last couple of years, bringing in experienced players at, who really sort of proved themselves at a lower level. Juice Wells, of course, had a great year at South Carolina, but started out at James Madison. But going through the JUCO route, which is a little bit overlooked these days, adding depth to that position with some other talented players in the mix as well. Williams being, one of the higher rated wide receiver, freshmen in that 2023 class. So Ole Miss comes in at number 1. Oregon is number 2. Similarly boosted their ranking through the transfer portal. Evan Stewart may be expected to be the top wide receiver among transfers. 5-star player coming out of high school, was productive at Texas A&M, but goes into an offense that, last year really exploded with a, top 2 of Tez Johnson and Troy Franklin. Johnson, of course, is back. His brother, Bo Nix, move on to the NFL. So will there be a super smooth transition with Dylan Gabriel? I think it will be, but Johnson and Gabriel not quite as connected, I guess, as he and Nix were. But Johnson and Stewart seemingly, again, one of those top 2 duos in college football, certainly have the potential to be. Gary Bryant Jr. is a starter as well, former highly rated recruit coming out of high school at USC. Trayshawn Holden played nearly 50% of snaps last season for Oregon, and there's some depth as well. Guys like Kyler Casper, Jurion Dickey, who came on late after not playing very much early in his true freshman season, but as a group, Oregon grades out quite well, especially with the addition of Evan Stewart. One of the best individual wide receivers, All-American candidate, Luther Burden III, might be the top wide receiver picked in next year's draft. He leads the number 3 wide receiver group at Missouri, where all 3 full-time starters are back: Burden, Theo Weiss, and Mookie Cooper. Also, Mekhi Miller, Marquise Johnson, Joshua Manning add some depth to that group as well. Strong Springs, helping to really solidify that Missouri offense, which did bring in a couple of very productive running backs from the Sun Belt, trying to round out that offense with Brady Cook coming back at quarterback. But this wide receiver group, a real strength, the strength position-wise for a Missouri team that has very, very high expectations. Top 20 in our overall power rankings, maybe the best position from a strength of schedule standpoint in the SEC. Mizzou really has an opportunity to put things together and have a great season. We talked about Colorado. LeJonte Wester just put up huge numbers at FAU. He comes in what should be, we think, still a fairly prolific Colorado passing offense with Shedeur Sanders. But Wester is not going to be peppered with quite as many targets we expect this year, with Jimmy Horn Jr. back, with Travis Hunter in the mix as well, Omarion Miller. They added Will Shepard and Terrell Simmons to that group. So quite a lot of capable wide receivers, guys who have flashed at times, guys who have been productive elsewhere. This Colorado wide receiver group legitimately is, I think, one of the best and deepest in college football. Number 4 in our rankings. Number 5, Ohio State. All Ohio State has done is just churn out first round wide receivers, and there are probably some on this roster. It's just a little less proven, I guess, than what we've seen the last couple of years, where Jackson Smith and Jigba had the huge Rose Bowl. last year, Marvin Harrison Jr., of course, and his incredible track record. But, Emeka Egbuka is the highest rated player in this unit right now, has been an all-conference performer, has played very well, but limited last year due to injury, not maybe quite as much of the name recognition of those players that immediately preceded him. And then from there, it's a little more of kind of an unproven group. Carnell Tate has incredible potential. Jaden Ballard seems like he was emerging as maybe that next starter, going to have an opportunity this year. But the player who, of course, was the talk of the spring is Jeremiah Smith, the true freshman. He may quickly emerge as a starter in that group and could quickly emerge as an All-American type wide receiver. So Ohio State, when we're just talking raw talent, they come out a little bit higher. We'll get to that in a second. But the Buckeyes as a group, still top 5 in the country, but not just the clear runaway number 1 like we've seen the last couple of years in these rankings. Rounding out the top 10, we've got Miami, which I personally am quite high on. Xavier Restrepo, excited to see what he can do this year. Number 7, Indiana, we've talked about. That's more of there's a lot of interesting players that Kirk Cignetti brought in to that Indiana group. I'm pretty high personally on Donovan McCulley, who he was able to bring back after a brief entry into the transfer portal. Had a little bit of an up and down spring, but guys like Elijah Surratt and Miles Price, Miles Cross, Keyshawn Williams through the transfer portal. Indiana has a lot of capable wide receivers. Number 8 is Texas. We touched on them very briefly. Certainly a lot of turnover for Texas. Losing Adonai Mitchell was big. Xavier Worthy, of course. But this group, which looks like it's probably going to be led by 3 transfers, Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden, who is now on campus, and Matthew Golden, who had a little bit of an up and down spring. Throw in Jonte Cook II, who hopefully will take a big jump as a sophomore. And then Ryan Wingo, the true freshman, was really a standout this spring. This Texas group looks a lot like Ohio State to me, at least as far as we don't necessarily know the exact makeup of how it's all going to work. And maybe it's a true freshman who steps up and really emerges as one of the top options, but a national championship contending team with a lot of depth and a lot of talent at the position. Number 9 is Tennessee, and getting back to the comment, Mike Matthews, personally, I'm not the big recruiting guy, but the numbers look very good, right? 98, 96 rating in the 247 composite, 6.1 in rivals, 97.49 in On3. One of the top rated wide receivers in the country, and there's opportunity at Tennessee for him to step up. Don't currently have him projected as a member of the 2 deep. Right now, we've got Squirrel White, Brew McCoy, and Chris Brazzell as our starting 3 wide receivers, with Dante Thornton, Caleb Webb, and Chaz Nimrod, all of whom got nearly Thornton had 24% of snaps, was limited by injury, but Webb and Nimrod were 34 and 40. So there's some experience there. Matthews certainly, I think, has the talent to step up and play, and could quickly establish himself as one of the top options in this wide receiver group, especially if somebody like Brew McCoy doesn't get back to 100%. Especially if you're relying on Chris Brazzell as a transfer, taking a step up in competition. Had a good spring, has certainly a lot of potential, and a big target at 6'5". But I don't know. There's a lot more unknowns here for Tennessee, but a system that plays a lot of wide receivers. You get a lot of deep routes and then take a play off, and that rolls in, kind of another round of wide receivers. It's almost like a hockey line change. So certainly, I think some opportunities there. Finally, here, Kentucky. Maybe not the passing offense with the highest expectations, but a wide receiver group that is certainly talented. I mean, Dane Key, Berrien Brown, now entering both their true junior seasons, were real recruiting wins for Mark Stoops and this Kentucky team. Have been productive in the past, even with maybe the quarterback position not necessarily operating at a super high level last year with Devin Leary, or even when Will Levis was there. There were certainly some moments where it looked like things were clicking, but not necessarily the smoothest operation. Brock Vandegrift, not experienced at the quarterback position, hasn't had a whole lot of opportunity, but him coming in, expected to start, expected to hold off the late transfer in Gavin Wimsatt. But Key and Brown, really solid duo. They added Jamori Macklin, started his career at Missouri, ends up being a star, at North Texas, a 90+ rated player. I expect he will join that starting group and all over, 90, 88 to 94 in that range. Very, very solid wide receiver position. All right, we'll speed it up a little bit, talking most talented units. Again, Alabama comes in at the top in these average 247 composite rankings. And we haven't discussed Alabama as a position. They rank 22nd nationally in those position strength rankings of the wide receiver position. That's 12th in the SEC. Still just incredible competition, especially at the wide receiver position. But if you just look, player by player, take that average recruiting rating in that 247 Sports composite, and the potential is there for Alabama to quickly become one of the best in college football. In our unit rankings, Ohio State number 2, which we discussed, number 3, Texas, of course, number 4, USC, and wide receiver was a real area for USC where there are great players in the starting 3. Certainly, maybe you could look back to 4 or 5, but right when you're trying to round out that full second group, the depth just wasn't really there. So USC went hard through the transfer portal this spring, added Jay Fair from Auburn, added Kyle Ford, originally of USC, most recently UCLA. That helped boost this unit into the top 20 nationally in those wide receiver position ratings, but depth still a little bit of an issue. I saw something earlier today. I think there's another transfer coming in, Charles Ross from San Jose State, I believe, committed to USC. I'll have to double check that. But Zachariah Branch could be a superstar, certainly. Kyron Hudson, very experienced. Jacoby Lane coming off a solid performance at the end of last season and a good spring. Deuce Robinson still listed as a wide receiver, even though maybe his professional future is at tight end. Makai Lemon played a little time on defense, but he's back at wide receiver. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of opportunity with some significant turnover at the position for USC this year. But again, like Alabama, the potential is there to really emerge as one of the best units in college football if they can. Number 5, Oregon. Number 6, Missouri. Number 7, Miami. Auburn sneaks into the top 10 in our most quote-unquote talented wide receiver units, and we've talked a lot about the turnover there and a lot of the excitement for true freshman Cam Coleman, who may quickly emerge as a starter, but Auburn also active in the transfer portal. Robert Lewis in the early window, Keandre Lambert-Smith, one of the headliners in the late window, as the Tigers hope to provide Peyton Thorne with more weapons in that wide receiver room. And then Clemson is number 10. Just sort of, a little bit disappointing last year, Antonio Williams, him being limited, but the emergence of Tyler Brown, who himself was not a highly rated recruit. His involvement here actually brings down those average 247 ratings a little bit, but Tyler Brown really stepped up last season as a true freshman. Bryant Wesco Jr., another true freshman who could very quickly emerge as a starter. So keep an eye on Clemson as well. Not a whole lot in terms of the units that really concern me depth-wise. If you look just at the lower rated wide receiver groups, you're not going to see really any Power 5 teams in that triple digit area. Maybe the highest rated team in the triple digits is Liberty, but I think that that unit is going to round itself into being solid and certainly good enough for Liberty to be still the big favorite to have the best offense and far and away the team to beat in Conference USA. But that Liberty wide receiver unit ranks 102nd nationally, not too far behind maybe their top competitor in Conference USA. Western Kentucky is 90th in our wide receiver rankings. Oregon State, if you want to call them Power 4, Power 5, they're kind of on the fringe, playing mostly a Mountain West schedule this year, is in the triple digits. That's an area where the Beavs lost a lot of their best players at that position, including Silas Bolden, who, of course, we mentioned went to Texas. Oregon State is 109 in our wide receiver position ratings. The Big Ten has a few teams in the 80s where certainly there's some room for improvement. Illinois, Iowa, and Rutgers, as well as Michigan State, are all in that 81 to 86 range. Houston, 82nd in our wide receiver rankings. The loss of Matthew Golden is a big part of that. Golden, of course, transferred to Texas, as we said. Purdue, 74th. Syracuse, 73rd. Now, depending on how you were to account for Orande Gadsden II, which we have him listed as a tight end. Syracuse has him listed as a tight end on the roster, so he's not a factor there. But Syracuse will show up in our top 5 tight end rankings. On that note, Utah and the return of Brant Kuithe comes in at number 1 in our tight end unit ratings overall. North Carolina, a deeper group. Bryson Nesbit, I've always been a big fan, big target, really just like a big wide receiver. He's athletic enough, but there is certainly some depth there. Nesbit hasn't even been consistently a starter, but has still been productive and when healthy, which is a little bit of a concern for this tight end group at North Carolina. I think certainly has the talent to have a great season, but John Koppenhaver has been the starter there, played 53.5% of snaps last season. But of course, also North Carolina brought in Jake Johnson, brother of Max Johnson, both most recently at Texas A&M. So, there's 3 players who could certainly play starter type snaps, especially if you get creative and use Nesbit more as a wide receiver, which we saw a little bit last season in that wide receiver group. Really, really banged up this spring for North Carolina. The number 3 group, as we said, is Syracuse, Orande Gadsden II, who went down in week 2 with a significant injury, but in 2022 was a major contributor for the Orange, which now the quarterback situation looks like it's in a little bit better position with Cal McCord, of course. So if Gadsden is back fully healthy, definitely expect that he will have an opportunity to be one of the most productive tight ends in college football. And then the 2 teams that were at the top of our wide receiver rankings, Ole Miss and Oregon, 4 and 5. Ole Miss now in the second year with Caden Prescorn, who started his career at Memphis, transferred into Ole Miss, where you're going to have an opportunity to be very, very productive in this offense, but maybe a little bit higher upside. Daquan Wright, transfer coming in from Virginia Tech, maybe a name to file away, somebody who I think really could emerge as a weapon as at the tight end position for Ole Miss. And then Oregon, rounding it out, Terrence Ferguson is back, multi-year starter, had a very solid season last year, but then other players like Patrick Herbert, Kenyon Sadiq back as well, and then a talented group of freshmen coming in, 3 true freshmen round out that Oregon group, which ranks 4th in our most talented tight end rankings, behind number 1 Georgia, number 2 Penn State, number 3 Miami, and then Clemson is number 5 in that group. All right, let's use the last 10 or so minutes to talk about our team of the day, and that is Texas State. So here's another Bo Nix mention. I've made sort of the Bo Nix quote joke with Texas State in the past, where this Texas State offense looks great under this new coaching staff. I wouldn't be surprised if they emerge as a dark horse in the Sun Belt West. And last year it kind of started to come true. I made the joke because our CFB Winning Edge team projections, win total projections and power rankings have been, have had higher expectations on Texas State over the last few years than most. And last year, our numbers really liked the addition of G.J. Kinney taking over as head coach. Really liked a lot of the players coming in, transferring in to run that offense. The quarterback position, we weren't sure this time last year if it was going to be Malik Hornsby or the latecomer TJ Finley. Finley wins that job, becomes a very, very productive quarterback in this offense, where seemingly just about everybody that Kinney has rolled out at the quarterback position throughout his career seems to perform very, very well. Finley was able to come in, learn the offense quickly, emerge as a starter, throw for 3,440 yards with 24 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, averaged 8.3 yards per pass attempt. Ends up transferring out in part because of a weird situation where Kinney brought in Jaden DeLora, who started last season at Arizona before going down with injury and then kind of getting surpassed when Noah Fafita kind of took that Arizona offense to the next level. There's a lot of off the field stuff and some real blowback on campus there at Texas State that ended up pushing DeLora out. He's headed to one of the pro leagues. I don't know if it's the UFL or what, but not at Texas State. Nevertheless, Finley, after DeLora was brought in, decided that he was going to transfer out. There were also some whispers over the offseason that Finley might be considering stepping away from football because of some injuries. So perhaps that was a factor in why DeLora was brought in. Not sure all the details, but nevertheless, Finley ends up transferring out. He's at Western Kentucky. So Texas State needed a quarterback and brought in the Sun Belt Offensive Player of the Year, Jordan McLeod, who entered the transfer portal after his head coach at James Madison left for Indiana. McLeod actually put up better numbers than Finley, threw for 3,670 yards with 35 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, averaged 8.9 yards per attempt. Actually didn't start week 1 for the Dukes, but quickly won that job and became one of the best quarterbacks in the Sun Belt. So has familiarity in the conference. And Texas State, again, G.J. Kinney seemingly can take a quarterback, especially one who's been as good as McLeod was last season, plug him in and expect that they're going to be in a pretty good spot at that position. RJ Martinez also brought in for depth. He was most recently at Baylor, had been a starter at the FCS level prior to that. And then there's still some high hopes, I think, for PJ Hatter, who for a while was the only quarterback with any experience on that Texas State roster during that whole transition between DeLora and Finley and before McLeod came in. Running back is an area where Texas State went very, very heavy in the transfer portal, but also brings back one of the best at the position in the Sun Belt, Ismail Mahdi, a transfer from the FCS level. Last year, a real unknown for most folks who follow FBS football, CFF. He was, a waiver ad early in the season and really paid off with 1,331 yards on the ground, 10 touchdowns. Also caught 20 passes for 275 yards and a score. But Texas State, brings back the player who was projected to be the starter early last year in Lincoln Perry. Started his career at Arkansas State, got off to a great start, went down, missed all of last season due to injury. But then beyond that, a couple of UTEP transfers, Deion Hankins, who's shown some all-conference ability in the past, Torrance Burgess Jr. as well, and rounding out the group, Jalen Jenkins of Washington State. So Texas State, very, very active in the transfer portal at the running back position, but Mahdi, one of the best in the Sun Belt, certainly. And then at wide receiver, what we're talking about most today, though Texas State only ranks 70th in our position strength rankings at the wide receiver position, they're number 2 in the Sun Belt and have one of maybe the best in the country in Joey Hobart. Cole Wilson had quite a season last year as well. And Texas State continues to roll in transfers who, again, maybe relatively unknown players. Bo Sparks, who was coming in from Utah Tech. They bring in Jaden Williams from Boston College, tight end Griffin Moore from Illinois just in the last 24 hours. Add him to a room that has Blake Smith transferring in from Oklahoma. Not sure exactly how it's all going to work out, but there are pieces here in this offense that are going to I think quickly emerge as productive players, weapons. Not very many people knew the name Joey Hobart this time last year. Maybe if you realize that he started his career at Washington State, but at Utah Tech went and became one of the best receivers in the FCS. Nevertheless, came with very low expectations, sort of under the radar. Wasn't one of those big commitment Twitter posts or whatever. All he did, step in, he was targeted 97 times for 76 catches, 895 yards, and 8 touchdowns, and think that those numbers have room potentially to improve, especially with the loss of Ashton Hawkins, who transferred out, ended up at Baylor. But Cole Wilson comes back. He was targeted 99 times, had 66 catches, 747 yards, and 8 touchdowns. But then you bring in Sparks, who had 661 yards on 73 catches and 7 touchdowns at Utah Tech last year. Burgess actually was pretty productive receiver out of the backfield, in addition to sharing that workload with Hankins as a running back. Those two combined for over 1,400 yards on the ground, 7 touchdowns, 5 for Hankins, 2 for Burgess. But Burgess had 17 catches, 227 yards as a receiver out of the backfield. So curious to see how he is incorporated into this Texas State offense. The offensive line, once again, is a position in transition. They lose 2 starters who are full-time, 12, 13-game starters, Caleb Johnson, Bray Walker, but bring back 3 starters who had double-digit appearances last season. Also bring in Talik Laquette, who was a 11-game starter for ULM last year. So that unit should be in, a pretty solid position. And then defensively, bringing back, a unit that ranked middle of the pack, 77th overall in our defensive team performance numbers, really struggled against the pass, ranked 102nd in passing team performance, but has some players who can get after the quarterback. Ben Bell had a huge season, very productive last year for Texas State, had 53 pressures according to PFF, double-digit sacks, 16 tackles for loss, a pressure percentage of 20.5. So, 1 out of every 5 pass attempts that the opponents, would make, he had recorded a pressure. So Ben Bell, very excited to see what he can do, but there is certainly some turnover Texas State loses its top 2 tacklers from last season, Brian Holloway at linebacker, Sean Holton at safety. Have, of course, been very active in the transfer portal. Fill those 2 linebackers spots with Max Harris and James Neal transferring in. Caleb Culp is back as the starting safety. Alonzo Edwards Jr. is back as well. There's some experience. It all sort of comes together, especially when you incorporate the incoming transfers. And our adjusted returning production percentage is 41st. They rank 41st in that number this year on the defensive side of the ball, 48th on the offensive side of the ball, 37th overall, which is the second highest percentage in the Sun Belt. So 66.1% of the overall returning production from last season that incorporates incoming transfers, and Texas State in a pretty good position really to compete in the Sun Belt, where our Sun Belt projections are not final. Our CFB Winning Edge team profiles in the Sun Belt still have a little bit of work to do, but right now we have Texas State favored in 11 regular season games. The one where they're an underdog right now is by 0.03 points against defending Sun Belt champ Troy. That is on the road on a Thursday night in mid-October. But once these are all fully up to date, wouldn't surprise me if Texas State is actually favored in every game, even though they aren't right now our highest rated Sun Belt team. That is Appalachian State, who, we could see those 2 meet up in the Sun Belt championship game. They don't play in the regular season, but Texas State opens up its season against Lamar from the FCS level. Also have home games against rival UTSA, which is in a little bit of a rebuilding mode, and then gets Arizona State on a Thursday night, where that's a real opportunity perhaps for a signature win for Texas State. Not that expectations are super high for the Sun Devils, but ASU is a team that I do expect will take a step forward, and a real premium opportunity on a Thursday night to make maybe some national news with potential quote unquote upside, even though we have Texas State favored by a little more than a field goal in that game. Neutral site game against Sam Houston after a week off before really entering Sun Belt play, starting with that trip to Troy on October 3rd, then hosting Arkansas State, go on the road to Old Dominion, get a week off before a Tuesday night game against Louisiana, a trip to ULM, home against Southern Miss and Georgia State, and then at South Alabama on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. So some 4 games, 4 weeknight games for Texas State. So you're going to get an opportunity to see the Bobcats, maybe a little bit more than you might normally on a Saturday, where sometimes those Sun Belt matchups get a bit overlooked on the national landscape, but plenty of opportunity for a team that, especially if everything comes together with Jordan McLeod at the quarterback position, if Mahadi and that deep running back group can carry the load, and players like Joey Hobart and however the rest of that wide receiver group comes together, looks like one of the most explosive offenses maybe in college football, certainly in the Sun Belt. If the defense can play just a little bit better this year, Texas State is really going to be one of the teams to beat in the Sun Belt. Right now, they're 73rd in our overall power rankings, 2nd in the Sun Belt, and favored in 11 of 12 regular season games, with that one just a true toss-up at Troy. So we'll have those updated Sun Belt power rankings soon, and we'll see exactly how that shakes out as far as our official expectations on the CFB Winning Edge podcast when we get to our Sun Belt preview in a few weeks. But that is going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate your support, whether you're viewing it live, whether you're checking in on the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, where we very much appreciate you subscribing and giving this video a like. And then, of course, remember the competition is ongoing for your favorite C2C podcast. Give a 5-star review and a comment. Spread some, give some kind words to the folks who are providing tons of information just about every day in that C2C podcast feed, where you can check the CFB Winning Edge podcast later this week with our Conference USA preview. Couple of I didn't mention Jolly at NC State. Sorry for that very early question. I'm a fan. I think that there's that NC State offense as a whole, with Robert and I coming in. Grace McCall seems like he's going to be a really nice fit there. They've done I've seen some folks refer to this NC State offense maybe as the most improved on paper in college football from last year to this. And I can see that, big fan of KC Concepcion. Needed some help. They brought in Wesley Grimes, and then Justin Jolly, tight end formerly of UConn, seems like a perfect fit. I mean, he's an undersized tight end, but kind of somebody that you can move around the offense. And Robert and I has a great track record of doing that. So he and Juice Farine seem like a really, really good combo. Similar skill set. Both have wide receiver skills. Not your traditional blocking tight end. Probably not the best at that as a group, but have a chance, I think, to be productive and be key pieces of an improved NC State offense. So on that note, that is going to do it for us today. Thanks so much for checking in. We will be back on Friday for episode 50 of Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Iannelli of CampusToCanton.com and CFB Winning Edge. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you then.